Hey guys, Dr. Plague here. Has ditching your bad habit been on your to-do list for a while? Well, I'm happy to bring you today's sponsor, Fume. Fume has a great ergonomic design. It feels familiar in the hand, and it's just a lot of fun to use. It's easy too. You just slip in the cartridge, pop it in, and you're good to go. No smoke, no batteries, just a tasty blast of air whenever you need it. I'm quite partial to the mint myself, but it comes in many fun flavors. There's no cleaning, no recharging, and it's there when you need it, wherever you need it. There's no smoke, no added chemicals, and it's really just a great alternative to whatever might be holding your chain these days. Plus, it comes with this cool little magnetic base, which is just... wow, I really enjoyed it more than I thought I would. So, if you're interested in kicking your habit, go check out Fume today, and go ahead and use my code so they know that I sent you. And thanks to Fume for supporting the channel. When my grandfather passed away during an early winter, my family scrambled to rid the house of his belongings before the first major storm. The asphalt shingle roof of his one-story home was collapsing inward after years of neglect, and most of the windows were boarded up with cheap plywood. Instead of paying for the repairs, my parents decided to leave the fate of the quaint little abode up to Mother Nature. It was the first time we had visited since they relocated my grandfather to a nursing home, but the place somehow looked the same as it had when he lived there. We found the house stocked with canned food, furniture, machine parts, and old magazines that he had accumulated over the years, along with manila folders full of recipes and tax returns. After a week of boxing and disposing, only the floorboards remained. "I don't know why you're filming this," my girlfriend Sasha said, as we entered what was the living room, carrying 2 cardboard boxes. "I mean, there's nothing left, not even that stray tabby that he used to feed." "Groucho?" I replied with a silent laugh. I held my phone horizontal to the plaster wall and zoomed in on the floral wallpaper. I doubt he's alive anymore. And I don't know, it's kinda nice to imagine the way things looked when my grandparents first moved in. "I guess so, but are you really gonna put it on your channel?" "Maybe. It is abandoned, and we haven't uploaded anything in a while." "Yeah, Sasha exhaled and bit her lower lip, placing the boxes by the doorway to the kitchen area. "He bought this place with the money he received from his GI Bill, right?" "Sure did. Hey, you think we can do a segment on the Nike missile base? It's only about a mile away from here. The military built it back in the 50s, and..." "Jordan," she said, placing a firm hand on my wrist, "you know I hate to burst your bubble, but I don't really care. Not today, I'm sorry. I have class early tomorrow, and your parents just want us to pick up the stuff that's lying around. Grad school is taking over your life lately. Do you even want to make videos anymore?" She shrugged and sauntered into the adjacent room. Apart from the vinyl floor tiles and the storage closet, the kitchen looked unrecognizable. Not even an imprint of a stove, furniture, or cupboard remained. As Sasha opened the closest door, she signaled me towards a crumpled newspaper clipping that lay in the middle of the shelf next to a dusty can of Spam. Sasha carefully unraveled the paper, revealing 3 black and white images of hunters with captions scrawled across the bottom. In one of the images, a group of men wearing wool pants and red checkered jackets posed against a forest backdrop. The image underneath depicted a man aiming his rifle at a cat-like creature that stood on a dirt mound with a pointed triangular set of ears and an arched back. "Don Wakefield takes aim at the dreadful Glawckus? I didn't know your grandfather was a hunter. Look at that thing. It's so hideous that it's sort of adorable. I don't know about those eyes, though. I've never heard of what is it? I think it's pronounced Glaucus. At least, that's how I read the name on an urban legend website once. I had no idea that it was actually a thing, though." Sasha adjusted her braided brown hair and flipped the paper over. The words "local hunter search for a livestock-killing beast" preceded the brief blurb about my grandfather and fellow hunters chasing after a creature they called the Glaucus. The author dismissed the idea as hogwash and suggested that the so-called dreaded Glaucus was a fisher cat, marten, or another animal of some stature. The locals apparently dismissed the men, too, but were concerned about their livestock and pets being attacked. Well, at least the story is somewhat legit, unlike that insane asylum you dragged me to. Are you actually disappointed by this? Maybe a little, I said, scratching my elbow. I always saw him as a cranky old man who thought the government was going to take his guns. Now he's a cranky old man who didn't know the difference between a monster and a common fisher cat. Then again, doesn't really look like one. I placed the article and my phone in the pocket of my bomber jacket and continued to search the remaining rooms. I found it odd that my grandfather believed in this creature, considering his attitude towards other paranormal entities. When my cousin and I told ghost stories around the campfire, he grumbled at us to stop being twits and stumped out the fire with his work boots. He also thought Halloween was a pointless holiday and turned the lights out when the trick-or-treaters roamed the neighborhood. Unlike many men and women of his generation, he wasn't religious either. He preferred the idea of rotting in the ground to spending eternity with his wife. We explored the other rooms of the house, but discovered nothing more than a few loose envelopes, a stale bag of M&Ms, and an empty toolkit in the garage. By the time we made our way to the backyard patio, the surrounding neighbors had dimmed their lights to a dull glow. Snow seemed to engulf the forest beyond us and obscure the path my cousin and I took to our tree fort. Sasha put her hand on my shoulder as I inhaled deeply and stared into the smoke cloud that filled the air. As Sasha turned in the direction of the house, I was unable to move. Even though we had thoroughly rummaged through the interior, there was still so much more that I wanted to find. My grandfather lived his life in predictable, clockwork fashion. His hunt for the Glaucus was far removed from the man I knew and the stories that he told. I know this isn't easy for you. It's not just that. The whole Glaucus story doesn't make any sense. It's not him at all. My mom said he never believed in anything supernatural. Even after he lost a son, he said he didn't want to hear anything about him being in a better place, and he's just dead. I don't think it necessarily has to make sense. I know, but this whole Glaucus thing, it really doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make sense right now. When my uncle died, we learned he had a whole family we never knew about, paid money to keep them quiet about it. My grandpa wasn't like that, though, I said, rubbing the back of my neck. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a gray-striped cat limping underneath a towering evergreen. As it moved through the snow, its left hind leg trembled violently. Hey, I think that's Groucho. Did Groucho have one yellow eye and one blue one? I nodded and bent down to tighten my shoelace. Sasha whispered the word "don't" with a slight raspiness. Groucho's eyes shined in the light of the night, but the lingering shadows prevented me from seeing if he had any noticeable cuts or scars. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Left alone, Groucho would likely freeze or succumb to his injuries. He can't survive out here. If we leave him like this, he's easy prey. We need to take him to an animal hospital. I hadn't a clue where the nearest animal hospital was, but I remembered how to approach and hold him by crouching down low and gently grabbing the underside of his belly. The closer I walked, though, the more his eyes widened and his tail stiffened. When I came within a few feet of the cat, he began to scamper, propelling himself forward with his 3 abled legs. It was still too dark to see his injuries. Knee-deep in the snow, I extended my arm towards the cat. Just as my fingertips grazed his fur, Groucho fixed his claws and began to whimper. I stroked his fur slowly and moved my fingers towards the markings on his hind leg. There were several of them, each about a 1/4 inch deep. Something mauled him, I called out. Can you help me calm him down? He's shaking. Sasha shook as well upon approaching Groucho, her face turning white like the snow beneath him. She stroked his chin as I attempted to blot the wound with the sleeve of my jacket. This only caused the cat to whimper in a higher pitch, taking quick breaths. As I continued to blot, Sasha carefully lifted him from the ground. He squirmed for a few moments before settling into her arms. She carried him around the house and into the driveway, which was illuminated by the headlights of my Chevy. I could see the markings more clearly now, and the thick gray clumps of fur that scattered about the area. "There's an animal hospital on Grove Street. It's like 5 minutes away," Sasha said, trying her best to hold the cat against her chest. He squirmed and howled despite her soft strokes around his chin. "Can you take him? He's really squirmy, and you probably know how to hold him better than I do." I grabbed, but before I could grab the underside of his belly, Groucho fell loose from her hands and scampered through the snow. He had learned to run with the limp, his 3 good legs carrying him back towards the evergreens. The moment I started chasing him, the cat picked up speed and darted between 2 trees, letting out another howl, which was longer and more painful. Sasha looked at me and motioned for me to run after him. I ran full sprint into the opening of the forest, but found nothing but his paw prints embedded in the snow. I wanted to follow the paw prints, but without a flashlight or suitable battery life on my phone, there was no use. "Maybe we could call animal control or something," she said, when she finally caught up to me. I shook my head. I was panting pretty heavily. "I don't think they'll do anything. I called animal control to get him before. They said they would come out and take a look, but they never did. He's injured, though. It's not safe out here. Trust me, Sasha. I know, but I also know they won't come. If we want to find Groucho, we have to do it ourselves." Sasha gave me a long, vacant stare, wrapping her arms tightly around her chest. She started to open her mouth to say something and then paused. Sasha was too tired and cold to argue with me about making brash decisions. We had had this discussion many times, whether it was about breaking into an abandoned building or sneaking into a supposedly haunted location. Sasha always argued first, but reluctantly followed. "You don't have to come along, you know. Don't even start with that. Let's go." Under her breath, she muttered something along the lines of, "I'm not doing this for you." Using the flashlight on our dying phones, we followed the narrow path into the forest, lined with jagged stones and twigs that jabbed at our shoes as we trudged through. Many moons ago, my grandfather told me that the path led to the town square. Over time, it had become overgrown and naturally sealed off from civilians. On occasions, my cousin and I attempted to find out where the path led to. We found only a few farmhouses, but felt oddly disoriented the whole time, not knowing which way to come from to go back. We spent hours in those woods, but not by our choosing. The further we walked, the fainter Groucho's footprints became, before they disappeared entirely. The last set of footprints gave no indication of direction. They simply vanished. Through the tree line, we could see acres of farmland. We figured Groucho might be darting towards the farmland for refuge. Many of my grandfather's neighbors, including the dairy farmers that lived behind him, knew of Groucho since he had stumbled onto their property for sustenance and shelter more than once. They would feed him and let him rest on their front porch or behind their house until he went along his way. Groucho must have been in his teens, as I remembered encountering him sometime in early high school. As we pushed through the evergreens onto the property, Sasha froze and pointed to a figure a few yards in front of us. "Oh my God, that's..." In the middle of the pasture lay a mangled body, that of a brown cow. The cow was torn at its abdomen, blood filtering into its coat, trickling up to its neck and down its tail. The hole was about the size of a medium watermelon. Sasha screamed and shivered. I bent forward and vomited into the snow, shivering too. "The cow, Jordan. Oh my God," she said, still pointing, ugly tears drenching her face. Sasha started to walk towards the cow, and I grabbed her by the waist. "Don't approach it. We don't know if what attacked it is still around. Don't get any closer." "Then what do we do, Jordan?" We stood there for the next few minutes, not knowing what to do. We just held each other, like we hadn't in a long time. Sasha sobbed. I pulled her in close and struggled to think of something to say. By now, I hoped Groucho had retreated far enough away from whatever was out here. In the distance, a single-story white farmhouse had its front porch lights on. "We should probably let them know," I said. "I really don't know what else to do." "Yeah," she said softly, still clinging tightly to me. We made our way up a tall hill to the farmhouse. We couldn't help but look back at the mangled cow a few times, just to confirm what we had seen. I wondered why the cow was outdoors in the dead of winter. I wondered what got it. The description of the livestock-killing beast from the newspaper clipping crossed my mind, but it seemed too coincidental. I wanted badly to say out loud what I was thinking, but looking at Sasha's pale complexion, I knew it was neither the time or the place. Once my roommate and best friend Zach told me that I let what I read about influence my thinking too much. Sasha made the same observation. They weren't wrong. I once thought my apartment was haunted after watching several hours of ghost hunting shows. I wanted to believe in the supernatural more than I ever had evidence for. Still, I couldn't help but think about that cat-like creature with the pointed ears tearing at the cow's flesh and Groucho's leg. If my grandfather, a lifelong skeptic, went after the creature with an entire squad, there had to be something to it. We reached the farmhouse, and Sasha was still pale and shaking. I was too. On the front steps of the house, I hesitated to press the doorbell, scanning the area for any sight of Groucho or another cow. When I finally pressed it, a few moments passed before a meaty arm opened the door. The man who opened it towered over the two of us, wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt that barely hid his massive figure. The man stood there, arms folded, and blinked a few times. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir." I knew by the tone of my own voice that I would fumble over my words. "We were looking for our cat, and well, it's not our cat, but a cat we used to know, and we saw one of your cows through the woods, and..." "The hell are you doing on my property?" he said coldly, still blinking as if trying to wake up. "Wait, aren't you Don's grandson?" I stared blankly at him and nodded. Sasha clung tightly to my arm. "How did you know?" "My name's Nick. I used to bring eggs and meat to him. He had pictures of you and your mom and used to talk about you all the time. But what the hell are you doing here, and what the hell are you doing out so late?" "We were following Groucho." "The hell is a Groucho?" "Do you remember that stray cat that used to visit him?" "Maybe. He used to come around, and my grandpa used to feed him. He came around tonight and was injured. His leg was mauled or something. We tried to help him and ended up chasing him here." The man grunted and took a few steps out onto his porch. Then, staring out into the distance, his eyes widened. I could see the color draining from his large forehead. With his fists clenched and his veins pulsing in his neck, he started down the hill. We looked at each other, trembling a little too, and followed. When he reached the carcass, he bent over and glared for what seemed like an eternity. The longer he stared, the more color drained from his face. We stood a careful distance away from him and the cow. "This isn't the first time," he spoke in a gruff voice, almost whispering. "My cows were attacked years ago, but not like this." "What did it?" When Sasha asked this in the same tone, the man turned to look at her, gave her a half smile, and sighed. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." "There are coyotes and wolves out here, sometimes bears. Could have been anything, really. It's my fault, though, for not letting all the cows in." "What about the Glaucus?" The words escaped my mouth without much forethought. They were on the tip of my tongue. Sasha nudged me in the ribs, and I said, sorry. The man contorted his lips and then let out a heavy laugh of surprise. "Haven't heard of that one in years. I'm surprised your grandpa told you that old story. He wasn't too proud of it." "He didn't, actually. We found an old article about him. How did you..." "My father was part of the squad that hunted that creature sometime in the 30s. It's just a marmot or something, but it scared the hell out of the whole town." But how do you know for sure? Sasha nudged me again. I'm sorry, my boyfriend believes in all this supernatural crap. The man shook his head and smiled. I don't, but that's okay. A lot of people around here believe in it. Why was my grandpa not proud of it? The man shrugged. Hard to say. I don't remember much, but I think a lot of people were upset with them for starting trouble. Also, sometime in the 70s, a friend of your grandpa's led another expedition. A couple of kids got lost. Wait, what? Look, like I said, I don't remember much. There was a man in the group, Arthur Hines. He took a couple of kids to search for the Glaucus, and all but one returned. Arthur said they went off without him. Your grandfather defended him, and a lot of people in town weren't happy, especially when he got off. Your grandpa didn't speak much about it. Your dad didn't say much about it either. Does any part of you believe? The man clasped his hands together and bowed his head. I couldn't tell whether he was sobbing or deep in thought, but he stayed this way for a moment before speaking. I want to. My father definitely believed, and your grandfather did too. After what happened with Arthur, they were quiet about it. My grandfather didn't believe in anything paranormal. I felt myself shaking as I said it. Doesn't matter anyway, but if he believed in it, I think I should take that as a sign. Even though Sasha was behind me, I could sense her shake of the head and quieted. Go ahead. The man knelt down and tended to the cow. I gotta take care of this. It's getting cold. You should get yourself home. We understand, Sasha said, grabbing hold of my jacket. As we made our way back to the woods, the large man gave us a wave. Sasha was still shaking her head. What? What is it? What's your problem? Nothing. You were just kind of selfish. Selfish? How? Really, Jordan? This poor farmer's cow gets attacked, and you make it all about you and your stupid Glaucus. I know you just lost your grandpa, and you're going through a really tough time right now, but can't you see what's in front of you? We should have offered to help him. This is his livelihood. You don't seem to care much, though, do you? You don't get it, Sasha. I do care. I care enough to realize that what's happening to that poor man's cow is the result of what my grandpa was looking for all those years ago. What happened to Groucho was too. Do I know for sure? No, but I know that the marks on Groucho and the mauling on that cow isn't the work of some coyote or bear. I'm done with your stupid urban legend crap for the day. Let's go back to the car. What about Groucho? You saw what happened to that cow. She sighed and kicked at some snow with her shoe. Groucho's the only happy thing I have to remember my grandpa by. That can't be true. It is true. If he dies, it feels like I'm losing that last memory of my grandfather. We stood in silence together and struggled to find our words. A miserable breeze passed between us. We shivered and started ahead for the long path ahead of us. Further down, we couldn't see any lingering lights from the nearby houses. The path ahead was consumed by darkness. I stared into Sasha's honey brown eyes for a long while before she whispered the words, "Okay," and started down the path. I grabbed the back of her shoulder. She stopped and looked up at me and smiled. Then she placed a cold, trembling hand in mine. You know, I don't want to take anything away from you, right? I know. It's just always seems to be like this with you. Every trip we go on, every abandoned place we enter, every moment we interact, it's on a ghost trip or an orb on your phone. You're so invested, and I wish I could be. I wish I could be as emotionally invested as you are. This is different. If you say so. I shrugged, and we continued down the path. I called out Groucho's name a few times, but I only heard the echo of my own voice carry off into the night. Sasha and I came to a point where a large metal fence blocked off the end of the path. The metal sign read private property. On the other side, I saw the cat in a small bank of snow. Groucho was pawing at the fence with his good paw, and his mangled one was buried a few inches in. "Jordan, he looks really bad. Can you get him?" I'm gonna try. I don't want to startle him." I knelt down in the snow. He stared at me with his mismatched eyes. He was purring loudly. I didn't know if he was purring because he was happy to see me, hurt, or a little bit of both. I poked a finger through the small hole in the fence and touched the pink beans on his paw. He didn't move. He rubbed his cheek against the fence. "I'm not gonna let anything happen to you, okay, boy?" It was a promise I didn't know if I'd be able to keep, but at that moment I didn't care. "Sasha, come to where I am and pet him. I'm going to try to climb the fence." She nodded. She knelt down to where I had poked 2 fingers through the fence. With my eyes on the small cat, I stuck my fingers through the rings on the fence and began to climb. Though it stood only 4 feet from the ground, I made sure to climb slowly as Groucho started to rub his cheek against Sasha's fingers, tilting his head and closing his eyes. As I launched myself over the fence, I heard something howl in the distance, only it was more like a screech than a howl. Groucho's eyes widened, tail puffy and enlarged, and he darted to the right of the fence and into the woods. "You have to climb the fence, Sasha. We have to find him." "Jordan, that sounds like a coyote. We could get hurt." I was convinced it wasn't, but I knew arguing with Sasha would be pointless, so I gestured for her to climb over. From the pocket of my jeans, I pulled out a black switchblade. I turned the knob on the handle, revealing the blade. Sasha groaned and shook her head. "Oh God, why do you have a switchblade on you? You've been dating me for how many years?" "I've had it since I was in Eagle Scouts." "Too many, apparently," she mumbled. "Do you think you're gonna have to defend yourself against the coyote with a switchblade? Groucho's clearly fast and good at hiding. We can go tomorrow." "He might be dead tomorrow, and that's not a... Forget it. Just climb over the fence." Reluctantly, Sasha climbed the fence. As she jumped, she tore part of the jacket on the jagged fence rings. I managed to grab a hold of her waist, but her weight, combined with the force of the fall, sent us both into the snowbank. The snow engulfed us, and before I could ask Sasha if she was okay, we heard the awful screeching reverberate through the forest. "It's a coyote, Jordan," she said, standing up and brushing snow off her. "Haven't you heard a coyote before?" "Yeah, but this is worse. A lot worse." We heard the screech again, a screech so awful it sliced my eardrums and churned my stomach. The screech, wherever it had come from and whatever it had come from, sounded like the screams of someone being tortured over and over again. This screech put the cries of a coyote to shame. What followed the screech was a combination of howls and hisses. "It's Groucho." "Jordan, with my knife still wielded, I darted into the forest, not knowing or caring at that moment if Sasha was following me. As I ran, I forced myself through the razor pine leaves and over serrated stone pieces that stabbed my sneakers. When my body hit a branch, I felt myself fall into the darkness and tumbled down a long hill. I tried to tuck my body, but the stones and fallen branches penetrated every inch of me on the way down. Halfway through my fall, I heard what sounded like Sasha screaming, or maybe it was the creature screaming. Then my body came to a hard stop against something solid. My body aching, I looked up at the stone, cracked bird bath that marked the property of a small brick house covered in moss. The house looked like it had been unoccupied for years. The windows had no blinds and reflected the total blackness from within. I brushed myself off and looked up towards the hill where I could see only rows of trees. I patted both pockets, realized I had dropped my phone somewhere on the hill. I could no longer hear anything beyond a cool breeze and some rummaging in the woods above. I had to find a way to call Sasha. I had no idea how far I had fallen or in which direction. I scanned the area to see if there were any other houses nearby. The brick house, however, was only surrounded by woods. As I ran towards the front of the house, the snow drenching my feet up to the ankles, which throbbed and felt like metal weights dragging me down with every step. To the right of the house, I saw a small figure standing with its back against the wall, looming in the shadows. Reluctantly, I stepped closer to see a dark-skinned boy wrapped in a wool coat, wearing a red ski cap. He looked no more than 8 or 9. I glanced at the window above the boy. They were filled with even more darkness than the others. The boy tilted his head in the opposite direction of me. His back was stiff, his hands were stiffer, his large brown eyes fixed on that spot in the distance that never wavered. He must have heard me, because he put a finger to his lips. "Can I—" "Shh. You'll scare it," he whispered, his voice small and trilly. "Scare what?" I knelt down to his level and lowered my voice. "What am I gonna scare?" "I forgot the name of it," he murmured, eyes still fixed on that spot. "Who told you about it?" "The man I'm here with." "What's his name?" I didn't have time to process what was happening in front of me. My first instinct was to protect the boy. I didn't know what I was protecting the boy from or from whom, but something told me he wasn't supposed to be here, and he wasn't safe. "Shh. What's your name?" "I forgot that too." Are you okay?" The boy looked down. I put an arm on his tiny shoulder. After a long time, he shook his head. Forgetting that I didn't have my phone on me, I tapped my pocket and swore under my breath. The boy smirked. "What's your name? Did he take you here?" Silence. I gripped the switchblade inside my pocket and looked over my shoulder at whatever he expected to come towards us. I couldn't leave him alone, but I didn't know what I could say to make him move. So I stared at the boy and continued making conversation. "Did he tell you about the Glaucus?" "Yeah," he said softly. The boy was breathing very heavily now. I was too. With 2 hands on his shoulder, I guided this boy toward me. He didn't resist. He didn't look at me, though, his eyes fixed on the snow. As interested as I was in the boy and what he might have to say about the Glaucus, the word "he shouldn't be here" played over and over again in my mind. The reality of the 8-year-old boy alone in the dead of the night and an old kidnapper made me absolutely nauseous and spiked my adrenaline. I was not going to leave his side. "I know you don't know me, but you're not safe here. My name's Jordan. My girlfriend and I are looking for a cat. I got lost and I found you. We can bring you—" He shushed me again and crouched low to the ground as the window to the house slammed open. I crouched down beside him and held him tightly. Clutching the blade in my pocket, I whispered for the boy to stay low as I rose to my feet. When I sprang up, the window slammed shut again. "He knows you're here. He said I got to look for it alone, or it will get me. Listen to me. We're going to run as fast as we can towards those woods. That's where it comes from. He told me not to move." I swore again under my breath. This time, he did not smirk. He did not move. At that moment, the house lights flickered on. "We are going to run, okay?" He nodded and bit his lip. I grabbed his tiny hand, which was frigid. At that moment, I thought about running to the road, but wasn't certain where the road would lead to. I also wasn't certain that I could handle running full speed with an 8-year-old in the snow up the hill. When we started running, he tripped into the snow. "Where do you think you're going with my friend?" said a voice that carried from the house. The voice belonged to an elderly man, but seemed otherworldly the way it croaked and echoed. "Peter, don't go with that man. It's not safe in the woods." Mortified, I leaned my head to see an elderly man standing on the brick patio in front of the house. He was too far away to discern any facial features other than round and bald, but close enough to see the frail outlines of his skeletal figure draped in an oversized plaid shirt and black dockers. His body was so tiny that the wind would blow it away in a moment, Yet he stood there menacingly, his sagging lips curling into a smile. "My name's not Peter," the boy suddenly screamed, bouncing up from the snow. He grabbed tight onto my arm and squinted. I pulled out the switchblade from my pocket and flipped the blade outward. "There's no need to do that," the voice cried. Then his cries morphed into a menacing whisper that carried just as clearly. "Now, let my friend Peter go." "My name's not Peter," he shouted again. "It's Jonah, and you know it." "This is what's gonna happen." I felt my words and entire body tremble as I spoke. "Jonah is coming with me, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it." My words didn't faze the old man. He stood in the same stance, sagging lips and a mutated smile. "Don't go into the woods, Peter. My name is Jonah," he shouted again. "We're going to run now," I said quietly. When my eyes met his, I could tell by the way that they widened that he knew the graveness of the situation. "I'll be right behind you." As Jonah ran towards the opening in the woods, I stared back towards the house, my knife still drawn. The man was gone now, the house completely dark. I hesitated for a moment before I caught up with Jonah, who was standing at the foot of the hill, staring at the endless snow above us. Placing my switchblade back in my pocket, I knelt down towards him, asking if he wanted help getting up the hill. He nodded, then he climbed on my shoulders without hesitation, and I began to climb, holding tightly to his sneakers. The weight of the boy and the incline of the hill tired me quickly, but I pushed on, and with every passing sound, I held on tighter. When we were far enough up the hill and away from the house, I started to ask the boy some questions about how he was and how he was feeling, and most importantly, if he was going to be okay. He either said nothing at all or spoke with a brief yes or no to my questions. When I could see the top of the hill, I asked Jonah how he got there. "I don't know. I was sleeping, then I was in the house." I swallowed deeply and struggled to find my words. "When did you get there?" "Today, I think." Did he bring you there?" "I don't know. It was really dark, and he was really old and scary." "Can you think of anything about his name?" I asked. "He said to call him Mr. Eyes, I think, or Mr. Hayes or something." Wait, did he hurt you, Jonah?" "No, he was weird. He wanted me to look for the glocky thingy." The Glaucus? Why?" I asked. "I don't know. He said it was really cool and all the kids were looking for it." "Other kids?" "Yeah, other kids. He said there were other kids and they were looking for the glocky thingy. Then he started calling me Peter, but my name's not Peter. It's Jonah." "Did you see the other kids?" "No, he said they got lost looking for the glocky thingy and that I could find them. I was scared of it, though. I didn't want to look for it, but I didn't say anything." Although the hill was no longer in sight, the old man's voice carried from the bottom of it. "Peter, come back, Peter." "Don't say anything," I said, putting a finger to my lips and motioning for him to kneel next to me. "Peter, where are you, Peter?" he asked again. I could tell Jonah was suppressing his instincts to shout, "My name's not Peter," again, at the old man. He clenched his small fists by his side. A cold breeze blew over us. Underneath my legs, I felt something solid poking me beneath the leaves. It was my smartphone. The screen was cracked, its battery drained to 2%. 10 missed calls flashed across the screen from Sara. When I was sure the voice was out of range, I called her. "Jordan, where—" "Sasha," I said, lowering my voice immediately. "I need you to call the police, and I have a little boy with me. His name's Jonah. Send them to my—" Before I could finish my sentence, the phone screen drained to black. I reached my arm out to where Jonah would be, but he was gone. I sprang up and immediately screamed his name, turning around in a dizzying circle, not thinking of the old man or whether he would hear me or not. "Jonah! Jonah!" I screamed once more, breathing heavily. "Oh my God. Jonah, can you hear me?" Only the deafening silence of the wind answered my call. In the panicked moments, a memory came to me of the time I got lost in the woods behind Granddad's house when I was about Jonah's age. I remembered my granddad telling me to look for any light in the distance that looked like a house light. I wondered if Jonah had been told the same thing. With nothing left to lose, I started running towards a faint light that glimmered in the distance. I forced my aching body far enough up the hill until I actually saw the boy chasing a small, shadowy figure with a swooping tail. "Jonah, what are you doing? Stay right where you are." "It's the Glaucus thingy! It's the Glaucus thingy!" I felt my heart sink in my chest as the boy swooped down to grab the dark figure that stood no more than a couple of feet tall, with pointed ears and an arched back. "Jonah, don't touch that! Jonah!" As I sprinted the rest of the way towards him, I saw the boy lean down by Groucho, who was now even more scratched up than before, missing several patches of fur. He purred as the boy knelt down to pet him. "Oh, Jonah, that's a cat. He's very nice. His name's Groucho." "Are you sure? He's kind of ugly." "He's hurt. Never mind. This path. We're on the path that will lead us back." I picked up the wounded Groucho and held him over my shoulder with my left hand, and held Jonah with my other in his tiny grip. The three of us walked cautiously down the path until we saw Sasha looming in the distance. As soon as Sasha saw the three of us, she ran for us. Standing behind her was the farmer with his rifle in hand. Sasha threw her arms around me and Groucho, while Nick knelt down to check on Jonah. Sasha told me that police were on their way and that they thought they knew the name of the missing boy. Jonah was shaking, so was Groucho. John took off his jacket and put it on the boy, then threw a scarf at her to tend to Groucho's wounds. The cat was purring on my shoulder, but still visibly shaken. "Is your name Jonah Williams?" Nick asked the boy softly. The boy nodded and turned to us. "There was an Amber Alert out for him about a month ago. I don't know how he got all the way to Windsor." "Jonah, do you know who took you?" The boy shook his head. "His name's Mr. Eyes." Nick's face drained a ghostly white. Do you mean Mr. Hines?" The boy nodded. "I thought he was..." "Oh God," Sasha whispered. "He called me Peter, but my name's not Peter. It's Jonah." "Is there anyone in your family named Peter?" Nick asked. The boy shook his head. "How about Pete?" Nick asked after a moment. I think I have a Grandpa Pete." The three of us exchanged the same wide-eyed look. "Does your grandpa have a last name?" Jonah nodded. "Pete was the only one who made it back from Arthur Hines's trip. He looked just like his grandson. He never said anything about what happened. The police couldn't get anything out of him, so Arthur got off." Nick couldn't say anything else before a swarm of police officers stormed our way with flickering lights. There were well over a dozen of them, and a few armed SWAT team members as well. A red-headed female officer escorted Jonah down the path. A male officer asked the three of us to come with him. In no time, the path behind my grandfather's house was full of police activity, and German shepherds barking in the distance. As we came within eyesight of the house, we saw squad cars lining the streets as well, and there were several news crew trucks too. Time moved in images too rapid for me to process, and by the look on Sasha and Nick's face, it seemed the same for them as well. The three of us waited for the officer by my grandfather's house, but he hurried back into the woods at the call of his name. In the driveway, the female officer let go of Jonah as he rushed into the arms of a man with long dreadlocks and a woman in a puffy brown coat. The family hugged and cried as the wintry mix fell over us. I stroked Groucho gently while Sasha wrapped an arm around my waist. We watched the police futile attempt to keep the news crews at bay by drawing caution tape over the end of the driveway. We stood in silence while the crews pushed their way towards the family, shouts and barks echoing increasingly in the distance. "So Pete never said anything?" I asked after a long time. "Not a thing," Nick said. "Who knows what that old creep did to him? Who knows what he saw?" For the rest of the night, one moment blurred into another. From the hours worth of questioning back at the station to the hours of waiting at the animal hospital for Groucho to get stitched up. For most of those moments we were silent. For the moments when we weren't, we listened to Nick's story of my grandfather and what little he knew about Arthur Hines. Arthur was the one who led my grandfather on the expedition all those years ago to find the dreaded Glaucus. Arthur was the one to convince him what they saw was really it. He was my grandfather's right-hand man, and my grandfather trusted him to a fault. What happened to the children was a shame too great for my grandfather to carry, a shame he never spoke of again. After our 15 minutes of local news fame, we barely spoke about it either. The officer never found Arthur Hines that night, or the house he lived in, despite the pleas from us and the Williams family to keep looking in the area. After a couple more months, they stopped looking altogether. The news coverage of the investigation died with the case file. We ended up giving Groucho to the family once he was fully healed. It provided them with a brief happiness, but eventually that happiness turned to bitterness when the public and the authorities forgot about the case altogether. Eventually, they stopped returning our calls and social media messages. Sasha and I didn't blame them. They were just sad there was nothing more that could be done. Our shared sadness carried through the spring until one day we received a phone call from Nick that he had found something on his farm. I woke up to screaming last night. There were awful coyote-like screams, even worse, followed by the chewing noises. They came down the path. Did you find anything? Yeah. When I got there, I found a pair of bloody dentures just lying in a fist-sized paw print, surrounded by a bunch of half-footprints from a boot or something. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. It was like someone fell there, but there was nothing else or no one else there, except a few loose strands of silver hair.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. I'm glad you made it to the end of the story. Thanks for stopping by. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, well, there should be some links popping up at the end of this to other great stories, maybe even some great playlists that you can discover. We update 7 nights a week, so there's always something new and something spooky waiting for you on the channel. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, there should be some links to Amazon down in my description, so go have a look over there. It should get you to all my latest books. Speaking of books, I've got my first horror novel, Towsy Homestead, available for purchase on Amazon. It's my first horror novel, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd go give it a look and maybe give it a buy too. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a subscription program here on YouTube, but we've also got a Patreon with lots of tiers and lots of different rewards. For example, our Spooky Skeleton contributors get their spooky 12 hours early. That's right, they get their videos at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. Ghostly Reader tier contributors, that's a tier that's only available on Patreon, I'm afraid, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep, hopefully in a timely manner. So, however you support the channel, whether it's monetarily or by enjoying our great videos here, thank you so much. Speaking of patrons, before we go, let's go ahead and thank them. Thanks to Sara, Unicorn Hollow, JustAmy, and Cinnamon Fox for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Shannon McGhee, Janet, Lee Kendall, Ronda J, Sue Casper, Valinar, CleoHarperReturns, Sara, and Queen Sheebah for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, Queen Sheebah, MissNewBooty, and Alex Connor for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.